Hey everybody, welcome to Lore Friday. I'm DM Galabond. This time we start looking at Chapter 7 from the Out of the Abyss campaign, which focuses on the adventures that happen in the svirfniblen city of Blingdenstone. And this particular set of videos that we're going to be doing in Blingdenstone are all keyed for Tier 2 characters at level 7. And the Out of the Abyss campaign, of course, was published in September of 2015. So now if we think back to some of the communities we've seen in the campaign so far, in Gracklestug, we saw a thriving city in its prime. In the Neverlight Grove, we found an alien but hardy community of thriving Myconids. Now in Blingdenstone, we discover another city in a different stage of its development. In Blingdenstone, we discover an ancient city that's trying to rebuild after terrible devastation. And the people there are dealing with many challenges, some new and some old. This video focuses on the outskirts, outer Blingdenstone, and inner Blingdenstone. Future videos will examine other areas of the city. So the theme of this particular adventure is that the PCs try to make friendly contact with the deep gnomes of Blingdenstone without falling prey to the many dangers lurking there. And the setting is the ancient deep gnome city of Blingdenstone, which is now mostly abandoned except for a few hundred hardy refugees that are trying to reclaim the ruined city after it was plundered by their ancient foes. And the hook for this particular adventure is that up until this point in the campaign, Blingdenstone is the one recurring location the PCs are told where they may find a way to return to the surface world. Alright, so looking at a summary of this adventure, a small but determined band of deep gnomes has decided to reclaim and repopulate Blingdenstone after it was abandoned many decades ago. Now, for 2 millennia prior to that, the city prospered and grew wealthy by mining gemstones from the quarries that were nearby. Trade is always something that was done away from the city, and very few outsiders ever visited Blingdenstone. Then, a drow exile of some repute, one Drizzt Do'Urden, showed up in Blingdenstone, and the deep gnomes decided to try and render aid. Now, along with other allies of Drizzt from the dwarven citadel of Mithril Hall, the svirfniblen ambushed and defeated drow forces that were seeking Drizzt, and they humiliated the forces of Menzo Berenzan. But the children of the Queen of Spiders are cunning, they're patient, and they're vengeful. After careful planning and marshaling their forces, the drow attacked Blingdenstone in mass and sacked the city, killing most of the deep gnomes and taking nearly all the survivors back to Menzo Berenzan as slaves. Now that was nearly a century ago. Blingdenstone was an empty ruin for most of the time between then and now, empty except for the ghosts of its dead and several other creatures that found the ruins and began to call them home. But now, around a decade ago, the current band of svirfniblen returned and set out to reclaim their ancestral home. During this time, they found many dangers and threats there, and some of them are willing to make a deal with brave adventuring heroes to render aid in exchange for getting some help themselves. However, like most other places, the influence of the demon lords in the Underdark is causing some of the deep gnomes to succumb to madness. And in this madness, they can sometimes be hostile, mischievous, or even try to steal from the PCs, which might bring them into conflict with the party. So there are several groups of specialists within the Blingdenstone community. While they all more or less work together, each one may have some special need of assistance from the party, and each one has their own agendas. So, depending on what the racial makeup of the party is and whether they have any NPCs with them when they arrive in Blingdenstone, the job of gaining the trust and potentially getting help from the deep gnomes here can be made either easier or it can be more difficult. Now, this chapter reveals something of the 5e vision of svirfniblen gender politics. Now, according to this particular campaign, while they treat both genders as equals, deep gnomes divide the roles and tasks of the community by gender, and, importantly, they presume all other races do the same thing. So this can cause you either some humorous or some tense RP opportunities, depending on your players. Now, of course, as a DM, you can follow the guidance of the campaign, or you can just ignore it and play to your own preferences or to the expectations of your players. Now, in general, male deep gnomes are assigned the roles of hunters, explorers, laborers, and warriors. And female deep gnomes are assigned the roles of managers, judges, politicians, and caretakers. So this means that deep gnomes might be confused to see a female PC armed as a fighter, or discover a male PC in the role of a diplomat. It just may be a little bit strange for the deep gnomes to discover that. So the main specialist groups that the PCs may encounter as they get to the outskirts of Blingdenstone are the Miners Guild, the Stoneheart Enclave, the Burrow Wardens, and the Diggermatics. So the miners are trying to rebuild the wealth and economy of Blingdenstone by mining both gems and salt. Now, both gems and salt are used as trade goods with the dwarves of Gracklestug, the settlement of Mantle Dareth, and surface communities like Mithril Hall and Gauntlgrim. The Stoneheart Enclave are the svirfniblen spellcasters, both arcane and divine. Many of them are engaged in the practice of summoning elemental creatures, such as earth elementals, to help with the defense and reconstruction of Blingdenstone. They also craft spell gems and deal with elemental creatures like Zorn and Galeb Dur that the deep gnomes sometimes persuade to help their community. The Burrow Wardens are a new group of young deep gnomes who are under the leadership of a svirfniblen ghost who has watched over the crypts of Blingdenstone ever since the Drow invasion long ago. Now, these young deep gnomes are not yet fully recognized as protectors of the crypts of the honored dead, but they soon plan to petition the leaders for such recognition. And the Diggermatics are the de facto king and queen of Blingdenstone. While they do not have royal titles, they are looked to as leaders by all of the other deep gnomes in Blingdenstone. Chief Dorbo Diggermatic oversees rebuilding industry, opening mines, and organizing the defenders of the community. And Quartermaster Senny Diggermatic is more than Chief Dorbo's wife. She's in charge of trade caravans, she oversees the magical infrastructure of the city, and she assigns living quarters to the new Deep Gnome arrivals that are drawn back to Blingdenstone as they learn about the efforts to rebuild and reclaim this ancestral home of their people. As the PCs approach the outskirts of Blingdenstone, they will first encounter the mushroom fields, which are farms, the quarries, or the mines of the settlement, and those particular gnomes who are assigned to work there. Each of these areas is organized into a work crew with a leader or a taskmaster, and some of these leaders have fallen under the sway of the madness of the demon lords. Now, the main work areas are known as Whiteshell Mine, where salt is mined, Pickshine Mines, where precious metals are mined, and Stoneheart Quarry, where magical stones are mined for use in creation of items that can control and command earth elementals. Now, there's a particular area that has been lost to the current residents of Blingdenstone, but it may be discovered by the PCs, and this area is known as Entomoc's Boon. Now, this is a huge cavern several days' journey distant from Blingdenstone that was once used by powerful deep gnome casters to summon Entomoc, and Entomoc is one of the princes of elemental earth. So, due to a friendship between those casters and the powerful elemental being, the cavern retains some magical properties that make any earth elementals more powerful and easier for the summoner to control if they are summoned there. So the PCs can find this cavern and tell the Stoneheart Enclave about it. They will influence the svirfniblen attitudes towards the party positively. Of course, this place is not completely unoccupied. It is the haunt of a mated pair of basilisks, and, you guessed it, a nest of unhatched basilisk eggs. DMs, what have I told you about the pleas of your players to let them keep unhatched monster eggs? Any unintended consequences are completely your responsibility. So, due to the history of Blingdenstone, deep gnomes hold no love for drow, and if the party arrives with news that they have escaped from slavery by the drow, they will be told that Chief Dorbo wants to speak to them. However, if the party includes any drow or half drow, or if the sentient gelatinous cube Glabagool accompanies them, the PCs may need to convince the svirfniblen of their friendship due to some of the historic animosity toward dark elves and some recent troubles that the people of Blingdenstone have had with oozes. So when the party reaches outer Blingdenstone, they find that the main and currently the only outer gates of the settlement are set up as a defensive bulwark. A large flight of stairs sized for gnomes leads up to the outer gate, with ingenious mechanisms for bringing supplies and carts up to the entry. Beyond the gates are several maze-like passages that are constructed to both slow down and expose hostile creatures that are larger than gnome size. Like their surface cousins, deep gnomes are clever trap makers, and many of these passages have several magical and mechanical traps that can be used against the PCs if they try to force their way into the city. So, presuming the PCs have a friendly escort through outer Blingdenstone, they eventually pass through the inner gates to inner Blingdenstone. Now, this is where they will find something of a surprise. Instead of the dour, smoky caverns of Gracklestug, or the eerie, moist fungus canopy of Neverlight Grove, the party finds a riot of bright and flashy colors and well-lit public areas in Blingdenstone's settled streets. Lighting is supplied by natural, magical, and innovative means, with luminescent fungi, caged giant fire beetle pets, and continual flame spells all used in illuminating streets and squares. The residents of Inner Blingdenstone are generally friendly, and they even have reclaimed an inn from Old Blingdenstone that was once used for visitors, so it has comfortable accommodations for humans, elves, dwarves, and other non-small races of PCs. There are vendors and craftsmen and forges here that can help resupply the needs of the party, or that can provide a place to trade some excess treasure for necessary gear or supplies. Most refreshing of all, they find that the gnomes are curious and friendly. The innkeeper in particular seems bored and will offer the PCs free food and drink in exchange for stories about their adventures. There are some encounters here. As the party explores the city, the PCs come upon a guard who is being devoured by one of a pair of hostile gelatinous cubes. Defeating the ooze monsters and rescuing the guard is another good way to prove friendship with the svirfniblen. They can also take time to meet several of the other factions of gnomes and learn what help the residents of Blingdenstone need. And in fact, when they meet with Chief Dorbo and Quartermaster Senny, they realize that the long sought assistance in reaching the surface from the deep gnomes will come at a price. There are some hazards that so far prevent the expansion of resettling Blingdenstone, and the PCs are asked to help with one or more of these tasks before the residents will aid them in getting out of the Underdark. So, briefly, the hazards that the PCs may be asked to tackle are dealing with an incursion by oozes that all seem to be drawn toward the northwest part of the city, scouting the strength and numbers of a colony of were-rats that the deep gnomes have so far managed to keep out of the resettled part of the city, dealing with a Medusa and the strange animated drow statues that sometimes attack deep gnomes from the direction she haunts, and finally performing some rituals to reclaim desecrated temples to the deep gnome deities that the clerics of Blingdenstone have not yet been able to reach. All of those will be detailed in future videos. So the most common enemies that you're going to find here are oozes, most of which are potential random encounters as the party explores the areas near Blingdenstone. Now, the toughest potential encounter that they will find is a dust mephit, which is CR 1/2, and an earth elemental, which is CR 5. Now, depending on how the party approach and react to these monsters, the monsters may fight or they may prove to be helpful. Now, special creatures or items you'll find here, there's some unusual and interesting ones. The two that I think are the most interesting and unique are deep gnome were-rats and animated drow statues. The deep gnome were-rats hint at a deeper truth behind the lycanthrope problem that is reported by some of the friendly svirfniblen, and the animated drow statues have their origins in one of the future videos we will do about this settlement. What I love the most about this adventure is the picture of an ancestral homeland being reclaimed by the descendants of those who were destroyed and driven off long ago. You can use the reclaimed and still unclaimed portions of Blingdenstone as a sort of template for a settlement in your own homebrew campaign setting, where the descendants of a long dead civilization are trying to bring the place back to life. Adjust the hazards to make sense for the area of your setting and the level of the party. In the easiest homebrew adaptation, if you have an underground civilization that's coming back to life after suffering an ancient destruction, Blingdenstone would make a great stand-in. But with a little more work and reworking some of the maps and some of the descriptions of the terrain, this could be adapted to other locales in your game setting. And svirfniblen were introduced in first edition D&D, so you can use this particular adventure with just about any older edition of the game. Alright, if you've been with us this far, I really appreciate it. I would love it if you would go and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and click the post notification bell so that you can get notified every time new content drops on the channel. Now, next time we come back, we are going to be taking a look at Rockblight, which is one of the smaller areas within Blingdenstone. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care and good night.